Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our 26th design journal, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. I can't believe it every time I announce how many of these we've done, but it's pretty fantastic. So, welcome tonight. We've got a few things to talk about. This will probably be more like one of our 30-minute design journals because we have less to really cover tonight, but there is more coming up in the future. One of the things in particular is that I am planning to do some sort of like a special event where we run a game with a group of people playing Cool Name, just so you guys can see it and try it out. So, yeah, so that'll be very fun to do. And hello to Zero the Blade, who's here tonight. Good to see you again. So let's first do our mail call. Mail call is pretty cool this week. You're gonna like this. Yep, some classic D&D animated series figures came today. Yeah, I'm extremely happy about them. It's always hard to get these figures in the focus, but they're pretty awesome. I was pretty excited about them. So now my entire classic D&D cartoon adventuring party is complete. So super excited about that. So that'll be great. And so let's see what else here I was going to tell you about. Oh, we've been playing Massive Darkness still. Look, it's going to take us a while, but we have been doing some Cool Name on the side, of course, doing Cool Name on the side. It's like always doing Cool Name on the side, and doing some of that. And so that's been going pretty well also. So that's been our gaming news and our exciting sort of mail call and everything else we've got going on. So let's go ahead and we can take a look here at what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about the combat system tonight. We're going to talk about character sheets, and we're going to talk about monsters because those are a few things that I wanted to talk about here. So I'm going to start by talking about this, a neat little character sheet. In fact, inspired in part by some of the work already done by Target Practice over on Discord. But here, I'll go ahead and share it with you guys and you can take a look at it. So this is our playtest character sheet. You know, I am not a professional designer, so I'm not trying to pretend like I am going to be the guy who does all of this. But the important part of this is this lets us start building on the different concepts and ideas that are here. It allows us to start to understand where people are seeing running into problems or things that they don't quite know or that they're looking to clarify. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to start working on this. So you'll see we put our attributes down the side and we broke them up into the different groups. Should we break them up? I think it's a good question. I think there's opportunities for design that fall into these three categories as opposed to specifying one of the actual abilities, one of the actual attributes. And so I do like the idea of keeping these separate. I don't quite know how we're going to use that yet, but I want to keep that there because I think that even if we aren't using something in the core rules, someone's going to come up with something cool to utilize those high level labels for the attributes. And so I want to keep those there as well. We went ahead, of course, we put in the vitality, max and current, have the defenses, parry, dodge, block, because, you know, there's those three core defenses. Put all three of those there. One of the things I'm going to be hoping to find out at some point is whether this is overly complicated. I don't think it is. I don't think people will be too put off by it, but I want to make sure that our, you know, 5th edition player base who are jumping over here to play aren't going like, what the heck is all that? I think it's pretty straightforward though. So I have a bunch of teenagers I'm going to be like middle schoolers I'm going to be throwing this at once we get a little farther along here, and we'll see what they say about all of that as well. Also, of course, you can see you have your wounds. Now, there's nothing in the rules about wound location or wound type at this point. I just put that in there because it's something that I was playing with for my own game, so I figure I'll toss that in there. But we do have our severity. And as you know, severity is going to serve as a modifier to your difficulty score. So whatever the total severity of your wounds is, that gets added to difficulty scores for your actions. Now, there's also a box for treated, because if you treat that wound, that severity doesn't count. The severity still exists, but it doesn't serve as a negative modifier. So we have a little treated box there as well. A list for the armor off to the side here, and then, of course, your initiative score. Down below, I put this just to sort of represent when we have some sample character sheets up, your action score and then your action dice. I think it's nice to put that in because then if something alters the action score, you don't have to reverse engineer the dice to figure out what the score was. I just like to have mine on there. Now, one of the things we did with the weapons and the attacks is we put in this idea of making clear how you add up your action score, your attribute plus your MO plus your focus if you have one, plus your specialization if you have one, equals your action score. And then you've got your dice. This is so that under normal circumstances, you're going to have that number and those dice there for you right away. You're going to know what sort of the basis of that roll is, what it looks like, how you put it together. I think that this is a really good approach. Now, what I didn't put in there, and I only just now realized it as I'm looking at it, is if your weapon gives you a bonus. We'll talk a little bit more about that. That could be a problem. We'll have to take a look and see. But in the meantime, this is your core action score. Now down here, we have your MOs because we are still sticking with the MO system for the time being. I don't know if we'll move away from it. A lot of people really like it and they like the simplicity of it. We are still going to do that rules module of the skill tree, which I'm sorry I haven't gotten that to folks. We're working on it. But that's where you can put your MO, any focuses related to that MO, and any specializations. Now, I don't love this from a design perspective. Doesn't show a good line between the MO and the focuses and the specializations because you can't add just any specialization to an MO, right? It's got to be treed down from the top level. So, we're still going to have to experiment. If people have seen other good character sheets, please post them to Discord, send them over, let us see ways other people have done this to visually represent that sort of tree of focuses and specializations for your character. I'd really love to see other ways that people have done that. And then, of course, this is one of Target Practice's additions. I really liked this thing where they put in the basic combat actions because this is a playtest character sheet, right? And especially we're playtesting some of the combat rules now, so it's nice to have this here. That was a really good idea to put that in. So we've carried that through, as well as the defenses, so you can sort of know, what your options are for defenses. Now, let's take a look at the core rules. I'm going to first bring up, because I don't have it there, let me share another document with you here. This is the version 0.3 of the playtest rules. And there we go. So as you can see here, what I've been doing is I've been building out some basic first shots at weapons and armor to define that a little bit more. What we're kind of looking at here, and this is kind of the whole point of this, is that a dagger, for example, doesn't necessarily improve your attack, doesn't necessarily improve your parry, although one might argue that certain types of daggers are built for that. So of course they'll improve your parry, but that's another story altogether. In general, just your average knife that you use to fight with. And then it's not necessarily going to increase your damage, but it causes lethal damage, which is different than your average punch. And so I sort of see that as being that defining point of a dagger. Is like, why do you have a knife? Because you can cause lethal damage where it's more difficult to cause lethal damage with a punch. Generally with a punch, the way that you're going to cause lethal damage is if you manage to get a wound, right? If you wound your target, you could potentially kill them in a single hit. I mean, that's the reality of all of this, right? Of life. And then we go on to things like a short sword, which has a bonus to parry, not to attack necessarily. It's not that long. It's not really giving you that much of an additional reach, but it does a bit more damage. And then you've got a long sword, which I will correct the spelling as we all sit here. Long sword, which actually gives you a bonus to the attack, because now you're talking about a weapon that gives you more reach. You can it's more easy to hit your target once you have that weapon in hand. And so you've got a bonus there. And so that's where we're looking at the long sword. Now, the club is interesting, I think, because what I wanted to do was look at ways that we could take weapons and make each weapon unique in its own way, right? What is it about these weapons that make them unique, and why would you choose one weapon over another? It's something that I've never loved in other games, is where you look at the weapons and you just don't know why you would choose one weapon over the other. They all look about the same. Sometimes the costs are different, but the weapon's not any different. Like, the materials aren't really different. You don't know why it costs more to buy this other weapon. So what I would like to do is see people find creative ways to create cool weapons that have their own unique effects. And I think that if you look at history, you can look at why certain weapons were created, and that can guide you towards how to make a weapon that is unique and different. So anyway, going back to this, the club, I'm not giving you a bonus to attack, although you might argue I'm suggesting this is more of a clumsy, picked up off the ground club, not a, mace. You've got a bonus to your parry because you can put a big piece of wood in front of you, and a bonus to your damage. One advantage of the club is that if you want to do non-lethal damage, normally that's going to make it more difficult for you to hit your opponent if you have a weapon that causes lethal damage. A club causes lethal damage, but there's no modifier to your difficulty score to cause lethal damage, non-lethal with a club. I kind of think it makes it cool to have a club because it's kind of versatile in that way, right? You get the bonuses of like a short sword, but if you really want to just club somebody and not kill them, you can actually pull that off if you've got the club in hand. So I like that. I think it's kind of cool. Now for broadsword, what I tried to do is I suggested that using this broadsword, and we're talking classic, big, 4-foot long giant broadswords that you can sometimes see in your local museums if you have a good selection of medieval weapons and things in your city museums. But adds 1 to the difficulty score for attacks and for parry, because you're not going to bring this thing up and parry very easily, and it's more difficult to attack. You're a little slower, but man, if you hit, you're going to do a lot more damage. And then finally, we have the flail, right? The flail gives you a bonus to your attack score, gives you a bonus to your damage, but it gives you an additional difficulty score if you're trying to parry with it, because flails are just not parrying weapons, right? I mean, you try to parry with a floppy chain, and you're going to have a lot of trouble. Now, doesn't mean that maybe you might want to make a weapon flail that has the ability to have better disarming capabilities, but we're not there yet with the combat rules, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at with the flail here. So this is what I want to try to do with the weapons. We'll come to armor here in just a minute, but I want to see our weapons be interesting. I want to see someone pick a weapon for a reason because it does something unique. If you look throughout history, every weapon was designed to counter, either to do a specific type of damage or inflict a certain type of injury, or to counter a certain type of protection. And I would love to see that in the game. I think we can do this in a way that won't be overly complicated, but would be very fun and cool for people to get into, because all of a sudden it's more than just imagery thing. It actually becomes an important part of the game, right? And all of a sudden it's really cool when you find that one weapon that is generally kind of expensive, but does that cool thing that isn't normally possible, like that broadsword and the extra damage. That's pretty great, but you're going to have some disadvantages for it. So that's really where I want to go with this. I think there's a lot of opportunity for it. Now, I will say that in my own games, I am very into the idea of certain weapons doing more or less damage, or being more or less damage to certain types of armor, right? Like the piercing weapons are going to work way better against chainmail than a slicing weapon, right? Because the slicing weapon is going to slice across. You're going to take up some blunt damage, but it's not going to probably cut all the way through. It could. We've all watched the videos, so I'm not going to try to pretend like you don't know that it's possible to cut through. But a piercing bolt from a crossbow is going to do some damage to somebody in chainmail. And I think that's kind of what I want to show is in our own games, we like to do that sort of thing where plate mail gives a certain level of protection. Chainmail gives a certain type of protection. Adding padded to your plate mail helps them defend against those blunt attacks and the shock damage that you take from that. These are things that we think are cool. Probably not going to go into the core rules, right? I don't imagine that any of that stuff would be in the core rules, but I can guarantee you the advanced rules will have an entire section that describes how to do that in your games, because I think that's exactly, well, not the advanced, the rules modules expansion book. We'll have a whole section for that because I love that stuff and I will probably write it up one way or another anyway. So, all right. So the next thing I want to talk about a little bit is I want to talk a little bit about armor. So let's take a look at the armor section here. You'll see that I put in a few different types of armor. So we put in light, medium, and heavy. Now, this goes against what I said about everything being kind of cool and interesting. But at the same time, for this play test, I wanted to keep this simple and straightforward. So we have the light, the medium, and the heavy armor offering 1, 2, or 3 points of protection against attacks. This is not a ton of protection, but it should be enough to prevent the worst sort of damage coming through. Now, what does plate give you other than a lot of protection? Does it have any negative modifiers? Does it make it harder to do certain things? We haven't even touched on any of that. We're not even trying to go there yet. Maybe won't go there at all for the core rules, but that's what we're looking at right now. Just getting those basic armor ideas in place. And then we started to talk about shields. Now, I think this is interesting because we hadn't really gone into much detail with shields. And with this .03 version that I'm working on, we are going to go into a little more detail, and you'll see the differences here. If I've got a buckler, we're looking at no armor, no block bonus, but it allows me to use the block defense. Maybe this will be good for a character, maybe it won't. I don't know. That's going to be up for you guys to sort of figure out for your characters and for the MOs that you create. But it's kind of a cool way to say, look, now you can use the block defense so that, let's say you get disarmed from your weapon, you don't have any room to dodge. Well, thank God you got a buckler. It's small, you can bring it up, you can block with it. Very handy to use. Then you've got your standard shield, your medium shield, right? And this one gives you +1 armor, which is not much different than 5e, right? So it gives a minor bonus to your protection. No bonus to blocking, but you can use a block. And then comes the large shield. We're talking the big, tower shields, those full teardrop shields. This not only gives you +1 to your armor, but it gives you +1 to your block. And that's going to be very useful for defending against attacks, simply because enough of your body is covered up that it's effectively working as cover at that point, right? Now, again, we don't have negative modifiers for these yet, right? And so having a large shield should have some sort of a negative. Otherwise, everyone will have a large shield, right? So we aren't there yet, but we at least put the rules in there so we can start playing around with it a little bit, okay? So that's where we're at with those things there. I'm pretty excited about all of that and how that's all coming together. I think that it's going to be pretty fun. Now, one of the things that we've seen is that during our initial play tests, we were running into a problem with the player-facing roles. Now, it could just be us, right? And this is something that in an upcoming survey, we're going to be asking all of you to sort of give us your feedback on. But for the player-facing roles, a few things happened. First of all, it was kind of alien to folks, right? They're just not used to it. In most games, the GM rolls and you give them your defense score and they have to hit that. And then you roll against the NPC's defense score. That's kind of the standard for most games. People were having a hard time adapting to that. So, that was one of the first things that we wanted to take a look at and say, all right, well, that's a little bit of a problem. We need to think about whether or not that's going to be a big enough issue to make player facing a module instead of core rules. We'll see. The second problem that we had was that it actually made it pretty easy to not get hit by the monsters, because there was a decent amount of open ending. It seemed like the monsters were just like completely ineffective sometimes. Sometimes it dragged out combats that you should have been able to just beat the monster and move on. A lot of this is probably tuning, like maybe if we could tune the player facing a little bit, and we're going to be looking to you guys to give us your opinions on that, and we're going to be hoping to hear some things from our consulting designers as well. But that was another problem that we ran into. And the last thing is just that it got a little weird once in a while, especially if you have a small group, right? If you have a larger group, it's a little easier, but if you have a small group, those defense rolls are coming on the heels of the attack rolls. They're based on some of the same attributes and MOs. So it's sometimes the same number and you're just rolling again. And it feels like you're doing the same action again. It doesn't feel like something different is happening in the game. And to me, that's super interesting, because that feel, that sort of narrative that comes from the mechanics is something that's really important to a good gaming experience, is that certain mechanics can tell a story as you're playing them, and you get the story from the mechanic. If that story doesn't feel different, if it doesn't have enough color, if it doesn't have enough character, it starts to become sort of plain and you're missing some of it, right? So that really gets to be a little bit tough sometimes. And so that was the other challenge we ran into. So for the 0.03 playtest document, we are going to be introducing a non-player facing combat system. Now, the player facing combat system will be included as a rules module, because I know some people love it and they should keep using it if they love it. And they should keep telling us how to tune it so we get it just right. But the new one's going to be player GMs rolling for the monsters. Now, I will say that we've been very happy with the outcome of this. It's been a lot more of a dynamic combat situation. Contrary to what some people have suggested, we actually are allowing monsters to open end on any of their rolls. The fact that you don't die when you run out of vitality has made this okay. Because here's one of the things that people talked about, that unforgivable moment where the GM rolls and the monster opened it in like 3 times, and your poor bugger of a character is dead on the floor by a single attack by a kobold, right? People don't love that type of a scene, right? It takes a lot of fun out of it for a lot of folks. Now, I always have fun with bizarre deaths. So again, I'm not just thinking of myself, but a lot of folks are just like, no, I do not want that to happen. What we'll probably end up doing is offering some sort of an option. So folks who like that sort of action, that level of danger, that risk of, oh my God, that thing got amazing hit on me, who like that sort of thing, you can use open-ended throughout. Otherwise, the other option for this is that only the bosses or lieutenants get open-ended rolls, right? So the main monsters and their immediate lieutenants, they get open-end, but all the other monsters, they don't open-end. And I think that's a perfectly fine way to do it. But again, up to you guys how you guys want to do it yourselves. Now, what's interesting is that you can calculate the action score for your parry, dodge, and block, right? You can figure out that score in advance. And that score becomes the difficulty score for the GM. But what's kind of cool is that there's actually a benefit to rolling your defense. So you could get a roll on both sides scenario if you wanted to, if that's fun for you. Like, for example, if this monster's coming at you, right? And you've got a parry with action score. I'm looking at my charts over here, but you've got an action score of 6 for your parry. That's a guaranteed 6. Might be fine, but if this monster's rolling really high, you might need more than a 6. And so you might decide to grab the dice and let the dice hit the table and help you out, because at least then you have a chance to roll 7, 8, 9 up to 12, right? Or open end. And so it does create this cool scenario where you can sort of decide, I am going to roll this one because I got to get a higher number when you're going up against something that's kind of difficult to fight and beat, right? And you sort of putting it all on the line. I think that can add a lot of fun to the game. So that's one thing that's kind of cool that came out of this, is that we played around with that a bit, with rolling for your defense when the GM is rolling for the monster. Now, I know that people don't want to do this all the time. I know that some folks feel that this bogs the game down. But again, this is about style of play and the fact that we're trying to design this so it works both ways. So you can just go with the 6, or you can roll the dice. Totally up to you what you want to do at the end of the day. But it's 2 options that you can have during the game. Now, you could say that some folks are going to be like, well, if a player's a min-maxer and they're going to realize that statistically they're better off rolling, they're always going to want to roll, it's going to slow my game down. I have to say that sort of complaint to me feels like we need to give people good advice for how to manage the table, right? Because at the end of the day, that sort of thing falls into the category of, well, if everybody's doing it all the time, then just don't ever allow it and just go with that flat number, right? Or only allow it when you're in a major combat situation, not in your just day-to-day combats. There's different ways that you can manage that at the table to make that work. But we'll have to see. We'll have to see what you guys have to say about it. So that's the thing I wanted to tell you about there. We've been talking about monsters, player-facing roles, all of that. Got a few minutes left here, and I'm going to show you one last thing that I've been playing around with. Let me bring up the right thing. There we go. So I've been playing around, and this is an older version, but with putting together some monsters and trying to play around with tuning some of their abilities. Now, I know some of you have made your own. I really would love to see some of those and see what folks have come up with. And I know that we're actually working on a number of them here, so we can get some of those classic monsters from gaming that we talked about in the Kickstarter. But looking here, playing around with some of these and saying goblins and kobolds, that's a good example. These 2 types of monsters are pretty common throughout gaming as low-level enemies, but they're also almost exactly the same. That's something that's always sort of rankled me, is this idea that in terms of their threat and the way they fight, they generally don't offer a lot of difference in the way that they handle situations. And so I was playing around with how we tweak some of these basic numbers to make them a slightly different type of opponent in each case. So for example, goblins, not quite as good at attacking, but they're wiry and quick. great at the defense. Kobolds, better at attacking, little bit slower on the defense. And so you change that up. Then you add in an additional ability for these guys that make them interesting. So goblins tend to team up. And so they get this gang up bonus when they all start ganging up on a person, where they're adding +1 DS to defend. Now, this was still with the player facing. I said it was a slightly older one, but they get a bonus for each additional goblin, which is awesome. And that makes it kind of scary when the goblins swarm you and tackle you. The kobolds, on the other hand, are getting a bonus to their defense when you try to attack them. Because what they do is they sort of like line up and protect one another, right? So where the goblins are sort of these vicious attackers and all come at you in almost a swarm, the kobolds are more likely to aid one another in a defensive situation. And so that creates a bonus for them there. And so those are the sorts of things that we're playing with, trying to create some interest and some color and some coolness around some of these classic creatures and make them so that each one has something different to bring to the table. So working on that. As you can see, we have some pretty cool stuff planned for 0.03, and hopefully within the next few weeks, we're going to have some feedback from our consulting designers to share with you, which is that's where the rubber meets the road, is when they look at this and go like, yeah, it's pretty cool. This looks like it's going to be fun. Or they can look at it and go like, it's never going to work, man. You're in big trouble. So I don't think that's the response we're going to get. They already saw the early versions of it. But it'll be real interesting to hear what they have to say about it, how we can tweak this. Also, down the road, what's going to be interesting is hearing their thoughts on presentation. How do we present this in a way that's going to be easy to grok, right? That people can get this and get into it quickly and easily. The last thing I wanted to say is that we are working diligently to have this fully ready to go, the full core rules ready to play, and as many modules as possible by January 1st. And so we're talking about a full core rule book with monsters, magic, and the rest. We got a long ways to go, and gonna have to work fast. But I do believe that the slowest part of the process is this underlying framework, because once you get a good framework, you can build on it. And we're already seeing people do that in Discord all the time, building really cool stuff. So I'm feeling like we're in a good place. We did have a meeting today to assess our current progress, and we're feeling really good about it. So I wanted to share that with you guys as well. All right. Well, it is almost 8:30. I'm going to wrap things up, folks. This does not a long one tonight, but thank you for joining. Join us on Discord. Join us on Facebook. Talk to us. Tell us your ideas, and keep your eyes open, because very, very soon, 0.03 is going to be out. We're going to be looking for you guys to test it. And not long after that, we're going to be, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought because I started reading comments, which, comments are coming in and I'm reading them. Zero the Blaze said he can't wait for us to show it off at Gen Con. I am so excited about that, right? Come hell or high water, this is going to be done and out the door by Gen Con. I'm going to make this happen because I want this so much to hit its target dates and to be in people's hands by Gen Con, so we can all be running games there and showing off like, look at us, man. This is what we all did together. Isn't it cool? So I can't wait to do that. And I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of you at Gen Con as well. So anyway, I'm going to wrap it up for real this time. Thank you all. I'll see you next week. And in the meantime, keep gaming. Talk to you later.